On a silent mountain trail, a German shepherd dragged his shattered body through the snow, pulling himself forward with only his front paws. His hind legs were broken, frozen, nearly lifeless, yet he crawled toward the only human who didn't turn away. He had been hit and abandoned, left to die in the cold. But the man who found him was a former Navy SEAL who knew exactly what it meant to be broken and still fight on. When the vet suggested letting him go, the soldier refused. A promise was made in that tiny clinic, a promise that would cost everything. What happened next will break you and then heal you. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and if you believe no warrior, man, or animal should ever be left behind, hit subscribe, because this is the story of a dog who lost his legs but found his wings. The wind moved lightly across the Rocky Mountains, brushing the vast blanket of snow with a cold, metallic stillness. Owen Carter, a former Navy SEAL K-9 handler in his late 40s, trekked alone along the ridge, his boots sinking into the powdery crust with each purposeful step. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man, his presence carved from the same unforgiving stone as the mountains around him. His face, angular, weathered, and framed by a thick salt-and-pepper beard, held years of exhaustion behind calm, disciplined eyes. His dark brown hair, clipped short at the sides and threaded with gray at the temples, caught the pale winter light. His skin bore the roughened bronze of a man who had lived more years outside than in, marked with fine lines etched by both sun and grief. Owen had come here searching for a quiet that no longer existed inside him. Years of warfare, explosions, and the final devastating mission that cost him his closest K-9 partner had left scars deeper than he could admit. Since leaving the teams, he had cut himself off from most human contact, choosing mountains over conversations and silence over the ghosts that still called his name when he tried to sleep. Today was meant to be another solitary trek, one more attempt to outrun the echoes in his head. But the mountain had other plans. As he crossed a narrow stretch of trail, something disrupted the unbroken field of white, a faint streak of red. Blood. Owen's posture sharpened instantly. His instincts, once trained for war zones, returned with lethal clarity. He dropped to one knee, gloved fingers brushing the crimson stain. Fresh, still warm. Something alive was fighting to survive, and it was close. Owen followed the winding trail of blood, his breath forming controlled clouds in the frozen air. 15 meters ahead he saw movement, a shuddering, desperate drag against the snow. A large German shepherd, easily 90 pounds, struggled to pull his body forward using only his front legs. His coat was a striking mix of black and tan, though now matted with blood, dirt, and ice. His hindquarters trailed uselessly behind him, smearing deeper streaks of red across the snow. The dog let out a low, broken growl, not out of aggression, but agony. He was in prime adult age, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, strong and well-built, a dog meant for running, working, guarding. Yet here he was, reduced to crawling for his life. "Easy, boy." Owen's voice softened, but his heartbeat thudded hard beneath his winter jacket. The dog's ears flicked weakly at the sound. His breathing was ragged, each inhale trembling through his body. Owen circled him slowly, assessing the injuries. His tactical training took over, cold, clear, methodical. The pelvis was shattered, the hind legs bent at unnatural angles, bones possibly splintered, internal bleeding likely. A vehicle impact, hit and left to die. The dog attempted one more pull forward, collapsing into the snow with a pained yelp. Owen knelt beside him, letting the dog take in his scent. The shepherd growled again, teeth bared for a moment, but fear, not threat. Owen held steady. "I'm not here to hurt you. I've seen this before. I know you're fighting." His voice lowered to the tone he used long ago with war-shocked K-9s in Afghanistan. "Let me help." The dog's eyes, a deep burnt amber brown, lifted to meet his. In them, Owen saw terror, exhaustion, and something that tightened his chest unexpectedly. Trust, fragile, unasked for, but real. The shepherd's muscles loosened. His growl faded into a trembling whine. When Owen reached out, the dog did not snap. Instead, he lowered his head into Owen's gloved palm, pressing weakly into the warmth. A surrender. Or a plea. Maybe both. "Good boy. You're a fighter," Owen murmured. But his mind raced. Out here, miles from the nearest road without medical gear, the dog's chances were nearly zero. The cold alone would finish what the injuries had started. If Owen walked away, the dog would die before sunset. But walking away wasn't something Owen had ever been built to do. Not then. Not now. He slid one arm beneath the shepherd's chest, the other under his broken hindquarters. The dog cried out, a raw, instinctual sound that cut straight through Owen's ribs, but he did not bite. He did not resist. He simply leaned closer, as though placing his last hope into Owen's steady, scarred hands. "I've got you," Owen whispered, and as he rose, lifting the full weight of the injured animal against his chest, he knew with absolute clarity. This was no longer a trek. It was a rescue, and time was running out. Snow crunched sharply beneath Owen Carter's boots as he descended the narrow slope, the injured German shepherd cradled against his chest like a fallen comrade. The late afternoon cold bit deep into his exposed skin, yet sweat gathered beneath his layers, mixing with the dog's blood and soaking through his shirt. Owen's breath came in controlled bursts, each exhale a disciplined reminder not to panic. The dog, heavy, muscular, and barely conscious, rested limply against him, his head lolling toward Owen's shoulder. His fur, thick and once handsome, was now stiff with dried blood and melting snow. A faint whine vibrated through the dog's body, revealing more agony than any loud cry could. "Stay with me, boy," Owen muttered, adjusting his grip. His voice remained calm, steady, the same tone he used years ago on battlefields to reassure wounded soldiers and terrified K-9 partners. The memory tightened something deep in his chest. He hadn't carried a living thing like this since the night his last K-9 partner died in his arms, an event that carved a permanent hollowness into him. Today, the weight of the shepherd felt hauntingly familiar, as if the universe was forcing him to face what he had tried to bury. Reaching the base of the trail, he approached the asphalt of the remote highway. Cars sliced through the silence, sleek SUVs, rental sedans, a tour bus heading toward the ski resort miles ahead. Owen stepped forward and raised one arm, signaling for help. His figure, tall, broad-shouldered, still wearing his trekking pack, should have commanded attention. But his rugged appearance worked against him. A man with a battle-hardened face, a salt-and-pepper beard bristling in the cold, and a jacket smeared with blood. Drivers looked but didn't stop. Some stared with wide, startled eyes. Others avoided his gaze entirely, accelerating as though danger clung to the air round him. One woman shook her head frantically, mouthing something that looked like, "No," before speeding off. A man in a luxury SUV rolled down his window halfway, only to recoil the moment he saw the dog's mangled lower body. "I can't. Sorry," he shouted, racing away before Owen could take a step. Rage flared momentarily inside Owen, sharp as a blade. How could people be so quick to turn away? But he forced the anger down. Anger was a luxury. This dog needed action. Minutes crawled by, each second draining the shepherd's strength. The animal trembled in Owen's arms, his breathing shallow, nose cold. "Hold on, soldier," Owen whispered. The term slipped out instinctively. He didn't care if the dog understood. He just needed him to stay alive. Then, at last, the harsh screech of brakes cut through the wind. A dust-covered pickup truck, older, worn at the edges, its blue paint faded almost to gray, skidded to a stop a few yards ahead. The driver's door flew open and a young man jumped out. He couldn't have been more than 23 or 24. He was slim, long-limbed, with tousled dark blonde hair that curled at the edges of his beanie. His face was pale from cold but bright with energy, marked by the earnest openness of someone who hadn't yet been weathered by life. A small camera dangled from his neck, confirming his identity before he even spoke. "Whoa, sir, are you okay? Is the dog—" His voice cracked slightly, revealing both shock and genuine concern. This was Kyle Rivers, a travel vlogger crossing the country in search of adventure. He wasn't physically imposing, average height, a bit lean, with expressive eyes that revealed every emotion he felt, but he radiated a kind of restless warmth, the sort that made strangers trust him easily. Unlike the others, he didn't hesitate. The moment he saw the shepherd bleeding in Owen's arms, something lit up in his expression. Fear, compassion, determination, all tangled together. "We don't have time," Owen said, his voice low but urgent. "He's dying." Kyle blinked once, absorbing the situation instantly. Then he spun around, flung open the back door of his truck, and started hurling his video equipment, tripods, drone batteries, a weather-beaten backpack, onto the ground without caring where they landed. "Put him here," he ordered, his voice trembling but firm. Owen studied him quickly. This kid wasn't strong, not in the way soldiers were, but there was steel inside him. Raw, untested, but real. And more importantly, he wasn't running away. Owen lowered the shepherd carefully onto the truck's back seat. Kyle, noticing the dog shivering violently, grabbed a thick flannel blanket from the front and wrapped it around him with careful hands. "There's a veterinary clinic in Dusty Hills," Kyle said, breathless. 30 miles. I can get us there in 40 minutes if I push it." "Make it 30, Owen replied. Kyle swallowed hard, nodded, and slammed the door shut. Owen climbed into the passenger seat, keeping one hand pressed to the dog's chest to feel the faint rise and fall. Kyle started the engine. It roared like a tired animal, but it roared. Then, without hesitation, he stomped on the accelerator. As the truck shot forward, Owen looked back at the shepherd whose life now depended on the kindness of a stranger and the stubborn heart of a man who had seen too much loss. He silently vowed he would not lose this one too. Not today. The old pickup truck thundered down the narrow mountain road, its worn tires gripping the icy pavement with a desperation that matched the urgency in the cab. Snow flurries whipped across the windshield, and the sky, bruised with gray and fading daylight, seemed to press down on them as if time itself wanted to slow their progress. Kyle Rivers hunched over the wheel, his slim frame tense, jaw clenched in determination. Though young, with a face still carrying the softness of someone unscarred by deep tragedy, he drove with surprising skill. His eyes, blue-green and alert, flicked constantly between the road ahead and the rearview mirror, where he could see the grim silhouette of Owen Carter in the back seat. Owen's broad build nearly filled the entire bench. His angular features, the thick salt-and-pepper beard lining his jaw, and the deep creases around his eyes gave him a look of iron resolve even in the dim light. But what struck Kyle most was the gentleness in the way the man held the dying shepherd. The dog lay partially curled across Owen's lap, his chest rising and falling in shallow, fragile motions. His once proud body, thick with muscle and covered in coarse black and tan fur, now trembled uncontrollably. A deep, guttural whine escaped him, soft, fading, desperate. "Hey, stay awake, soldier," Owen said, voice low but sharp with command. His gloved hand rested on the dog's neck, steady but urgent. "You don't get to quit on me. Not now." The dog's ears twitched weakly at the tone. Owen took that as a sign he was still fighting. Kyle swallowed hard, feeling pressure rise in his chest. He had picked up strangers before during his travels, hikers needing rides or old men walking long stretches of highway, but never had he witnessed anything like this. Never had he been responsible for a life slipping away inch by inch. The truck hit a patch of slush, fishtailing for a split second before Kyle corrected it. Owen braced himself with one arm, tightening his hold on the shepherd with the other. "You okay up there?" he asked, his voice rough but not unfriendly. Kyle nodded, too focused to speak. After several tense minutes, Kyle risked a glance again at the rearview mirror. "Sir, "You're not just some guy out hiking, are you?" Owen didn't answer immediately. His jaw tightened, the scar beneath his right cheekbone, thin but noticeable, catching the dim light. It was a scar formed not from wilderness accidents but from something far harsher. "Not anymore," he finally said, voice low. Kyle opened his mouth to ask more, but Owen's focus had already shifted back to the shepherd. The dog's eyes, amber and full of pain, were half-lidded now. His breathing had grown so faint that Kyle could barely see the rise and fall of his rib cage. "Hey!" Owen barked suddenly, tapping the dog's cheek with 2 fingers. "Look at me." The shepherd managed a flicker of movement, a weak attempt to lift his head. It wasn't much, but it was enough to yank Kyle's heart into his throat. "He knows your voice," Kyle murmured, unable to hide the awe and sadness in his tone. "He hears you." "Then he'll make it," Owen replied with absolute conviction, though his chest tightened with the fear of losing another companion. Kyle reached over, fumbling for the small camera clipped to the dash. He hesitated only a second before switching it on. The lens pointed back toward Owen, capturing the raw intensity on the older man's face, the tenderness in his grip, the dog's trembling body. Something inside Kyle whispered that this moment mattered, that someone out there needed to see that compassion still existed in the world. The powerful truck roared through the final stretch of road leading into Dusty Hills, a small town with a single traffic light and a cluster of storefronts dusted in white. The veterinary clinic sat at the far end, a squat building with fogged-up windows and a dim porch light flickering through the snow. "Almost there," Kyle shouted, turning sharply into the lot. Owen didn't wait for the truck to stop completely. The moment the wheels slowed enough, he shoved the door open, gathered the shepherd into his arms with a grunt, and leapt out. Kyle scrambled after him. Owen sprinted toward the entrance, boots pounding against the icy pavement. Though weighed down by nearly 90 pounds of limp canine muscle, he moved with the powerful momentum of a man who had carried wounded brothers through gunfire and burning debris. The door slammed open under his shoulder. A bell chimed overhead. Warm, sterile air rushed out. A startled receptionist, a woman in her 50s with silver hair tied in a tight bun, looked up from her paperwork. Her glasses slipped slightly down her nose as she froze at the sight of the bloodied shepherd cradled in the arms of a grim, broad-shouldered stranger. "Help!" Owen barked. "He's fading!" The woman gasped, fumbling for the emergency buzzer. "Doctor, we need you in front now." As staff rushed forward, Owen lowered the dog onto the nearest gurney, his hand trembling as he stepped back. The shepherd's breathing was now barely a whisper. Kyle stood behind him, chest heaving, heart pounding wildly. And as the clinic doors swung shut behind the medical team, Owen felt a fierce, silent vow form inside him, a vow forged from grief, duty, and the hope glowing faintly in a pair of fading amber eyes. He would not let this dog die. Not after everything. The emergency room doors swung open as 2 veterinary technicians rushed the gurney deeper into the clinic, their sneakers squeaking against the polished linoleum. Owen Carter followed close behind, his breath still ragged from the sprint. His large frame, broad shoulders, thick arms, and the stern lines of his battle-hardened face seemed almost too intense for the sterile, fluorescent brightness of the medical wing. The salt-and-pepper beard that shadowed his jaw twitched with every shallow breath he took. He hated this feeling, waiting while someone else decided the fate of a companion he had sworn, if only moments ago, to protect. Kyle Rivers, with his slim build, messy blonde hair, and anxious energy buzzing around him, hovered near the doorway like a nervous sparrow. His camera still hung forgotten around his neck, bouncing lightly as he paced back and forth. He wasn't used to life-or-death situations. The fear on his youthful face made that painfully clear. A tall man in a white coat appeared moments later, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. This was Dr. William Hayes, the lead veterinarian. He was in his mid-50s, with thinning gray hair combed neatly to one side and a face shaped by equal parts compassion and fatigue. Lines etched deeply around his mouth told the story of a man who had spent decades delivering both miracles and heartbreak to animal owners. His eyes, dull blue but kind, held the weight of what he was about to say. "Sir," Dr. Hayes addressed Owen, glancing once more at the X-ray films clipped to the light board behind him. "The injuries are extensive." Owen stepped forward, fists tightening. "Tell me straight." Dr. Hayes inhaled. "The dog has a fractured femur in one leg and a shattered pelvis on the other. There is likely spinal trauma as well. Without immediate surgery, he will not survive the night." Kyle stopped pacing. Owen's jaw flexed. "Then do the surgery," he said. The doctor looked at him with a mixture of understanding and regret. "It isn't that simple. This type of operation is complicated. Requires plates, screws, specialized anesthesia. Costs can reach several $1,000s, potentially more." Owen lifted his chin, ready to agree to anything, but Dr. Hayes continued, softer this time. "We also scanned for a microchip. The dog has none. He's legally unclaimed. Normally, in cases like this, the humane option we offer is—" Owen slammed his palm onto the counter so hard that the receptionist jumped. "Don't say it." His voice dropped an octave, hard and cold as winter steel. Dr. Hayes paused, cautiously choosing his words. "Sir, euthanasia may be the only viable choice if there is no one to authorize or afford treatment." The word hit Owen like a punch, dredging up memories he had buried under years of silence. The battlefield. Smoke. Screaming. His K-9 partner bleeding out in his lap while the medic shouted they had to retreat. A life, slipping away because help hadn't come fast enough. He took a step closer to the doctor, his dark brows furrowing. That dog crawled through the snow to stay alive. He chose to fight, and as long as he's fighting, nobody's putting him down. Dr. Hayes opened his mouth to reply, but Owen was already pulling out his wallet, retrieving a battered credit card. He shoved it toward the receptionist. "Run it." The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with soft, round features and deep smile lines, swiped the card, but her expression fell moments later. "It's declining." She swallowed. "It says the account is locked. Suspicious activity." Owen's stomach dropped, though he kept his expression stone still. He rarely used the card. It made sense it might flag an unusual charge in a small town. But the timing couldn't have been worse. "Try again," he growled. She did. It failed again. Owen felt something twist painfully inside him. A familiar helplessness, the kind that had shadows echoing beside it. Before he could speak, Kyle stepped forward. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice didn't. "Use mine." Owen turned sharply to look at him. Kyle held up his phone, face pale but eyes blazing with determination. "I've got enough for the deposit. It's all I have. I mean literally all. But if it keeps him alive—" He took a shaky breath. "Do it." Dr. Hayes blinked, taken aback. "Young man, you don't have to—" "I want to," Kyle insisted, voice cracking but firm. "Just save him." Owen stared at the kid, a strange mix of disbelief and respect washing over him. Kyle, who barely knew him, who had met the dog less than an hour ago, was offering everything he had without hesitation. "You realize," Dr. Hayes said carefully, "this is only the initial amount. There will be follow-up treatments, medication, therapy—" "One thing at a time," Kyle cut him off. "Start the surgery." The doctor exhaled slowly, nodding. "Very well, we'll prep the operating room now." Kyle completed the payment with trembling fingers. When the message, "Transaction approved," blinked on the screen, he exhaled a shaky laugh, half relief, half fear of what he had just committed to. Owen stepped closer, placing a heavy hand on the young man's shoulder. His grip was firm but not crushing, a silent acknowledgement of courage. "You didn't have to do that," Owen said quietly. Kyle swallowed. "Yeah, I did." As the surgical team wheeled the shepherd away, the dog's head lolled briefly, his amber eyes flickering toward Owen one last time before closing. Owen whispered, "Hang in there, boy. We're not done yet." And the doors to the operating room shut with a soft, echoing finality. For 6 long hours, time stretched thin inside the dimly lit waiting room of the Dusty Hills Veterinary Clinic. The worn cushions of the chairs, the soft hum of fluorescent lights, and the distant clatter of surgical equipment behind the double doors all blurred together into a single, suffocating pressure. Owen Carter sat rigidly on the edge of a plastic chair, elbows on his knees, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles whitened beneath his rough skin. Though he looked carved from stone, his tall frame broad and unmoving, his bearded jaw set in silent vigilance, there was a storm beneath the surface. Each tick of the clock echoed like a countdown, stirring the ghosts he fought so hard to silence. Owen's salt-and-pepper beard, thick and coarse, cast deep shadows over his features, making the sharp angles of his cheekbones pronounced. His weathered face, bronzed by years of sun, scarred by past battles, remained hard, but his eyes betrayed him. Every time a muffled sound came from the operating wing, his dark, deep-set eyes flicked up with a flicker of hope before falling into worry again. Across the room sat Kyle Rivers, his posture restless and full of barely contained energy. The young vlogger's blonde hair, normally messy in a carefree way, fell limply across his forehead from being pushed back repeatedly by anxious fingers. He looked smaller than usual, his thin frame folding into the chair, his shoulders curled inward as though protecting something fragile within himself, but his hands were busy, desperately busy. Kyle sat hunched over his laptop, surrounded by a tangle of camera gear and wires. His blue-green eyes were red-rimmed from exhaustion, yet the determination burning in them never wavered. He edited footage with manic precision. Owen carrying the injured dog through the snow, the frantic rush down the mountain road, the moment Kyle shouted, "I'll pay," with trembling resolve. He cut them together into a raw narrative, unpolished, emotional, real. A story he believed people needed to see. He titled it, "The Old Soldier and the Dog Who Refused to Give Up." Before hitting upload, Kyle hesitated, glancing toward Owen. I hope you don't mind," he murmured. Owen didn't respond at first. His gaze remained fixed on the closed surgical doors. Finally he exhaled, the sound heavy. "If it helps him, post it." Kyle nodded silently and pressed upload. Minutes crept by. Then notifications began. A few comments, a few hundred views, then more, much more. As the night deepened, Kyle watched numbers climb at a speed he'd never experienced. 50,000 views? He whispered in disbelief. Then, 5 minutes later, 80? No, what, 100,000 already? Owen barely reacted, still locked in the internal battle of helpless waiting, but Kyle felt his pulse skyrocket. Messages poured in, strangers expressing hope, prayers, offers to help. Donations started trickling through the link he had added, at the last second. What began as trickles soon became a torrent. At 3 a.m., Kyle glanced up and whispered, "Owen." It hit 1 million. Owen finally looked over, his expression easing just a fraction. "People care more than we think," Kyle added quietly. Owen grunted softly, an acknowledgement, maybe even agreement, but he returned his eyes to the surgical doors as if willing the dog to return through sheer force of will. As dawn broke, pale sunlight filtered through the frosted clinic windows, painting soft gold onto the cold tile floors. Kyle had fallen asleep sitting upright, his head leaning awkwardly against the wall, the laptop resting on his thighs. Owen remained awake, fueled by adrenaline and fear. When the doors finally opened, they both jerked to attention. Dr. William Hayes emerged, surgical cap in hand, his face tired but carrying a rare, gentle warmth. Owen stood immediately. "Doc?" he asked, voice gruff but cracking under the strain of the night. Dr. Hayes smiled faintly. He made it. Kyle shot to his feet. He did. Yes, the pelvis was worse than expected, and stabilizing the spine was complicated, but he pulled through. He's not out of danger, but he survived the surgery. Owen's eyes closed for a brief moment, a deep breath shaking through him. Relief, powerful and raw, washed over the hardened edges of his soul. He deserves a name, Dr. Hayes added softly. Owen opened his eyes, voice low and certain. Atlas. Kyle blinked. Like the Titan. Owen nodded. He carried his world on his back. This one carried his pain the same way. The doctor smiled approvingly. A strong name, fitting. Kyle's phone buzzed wildly in his pocket. When he pulled it out, his jaw nearly dropped. Owen, you need to see this. The video had crossed 2 million views. Donations exploded into numbers neither of them expected. Messages from across the country promising help, money, supplies, prayers. There's enough to cover everything, Kyle said, voice trembling with stunned joy. The surgery, the therapy, months of it. For the first time since they met, Owen's hardened face softened visibly. Not just in gratitude, but something deeper. A quiet recognition that hope, once lost, could return in the most unexpected ways. Behind the surgical glass, Atlas slept peacefully, chest rising and falling with a fragile but determined rhythm. He had survived the impossible, and the world had shown up for him. A miracle, born from fight and faith, now spreading far beyond the tiny clinic in Dusty Hills. The spring sun hung low over the quiet town of Dusty Hills, casting warm amber light across the cracked asphalt of a small mechanic's garage tucked between a diner and an abandoned feed store. 2 months had passed since the surgery. 2 long, grinding months of recovery, sleepless nights, and slow victories marked not by leaps, but by inches. Atlas, once a massive German shepherd crushed by an unforgiving world, now bore a shaved spine stitched with fading scars. His thick tan and black coat had begun to grow back, softer around the wound, and his upper body had grown noticeably stronger. Thick shoulders, hardened muscles, and determined eyes that seemed to understand everything said to him. His hind legs, however, remained still. No nerves, no response, no future of running on 4 paws. But Owen Carter refused to let paralysis be the end of the story. Inside the garage, the air smelled of motor oil, cold steel, and dust. Sparks flew as Owen leaned over a welding table, his rugged frame silhouetted by the sizzle of molten light. He had tied back his long, wind-swept dark hair with a scrap of cloth, revealing the full stern structure of his face, a square jaw framed by a thick salt-and-pepper beard, eyes narrowed in unwavering focus. Sweat glistened across his weathered tan skin, catching in the wrinkles born from war, loss, and years of giving more than he ever received. Owen moved with the controlled precision of someone who had built things in deserts, jungles, and battlefields. Someone who had learned to create solutions with limited tools and unlimited determination. Each weld, each cut of metal was deliberate. He wasn't building a mere mobility aid, he was building armor, freedom, dignity. Nearby, Kyle Rivers paced excitedly between stacks of packages that had arrived from across the country. His lean figure, dressed in faded jeans and a hoodie splattered with grease, buzzed with the same energy that made him an engaging storyteller online. His blonde hair curled around his ears, messy from days of little sleep. Yet his green-blue eyes sparkled with pride every time he looked at Atlas resting on a thick padded blanket. "Dude, check this out," Kyle called out, waving a box above his head. "These are off-road bearings from a guy in Montana who said he cried watching your first steps after surgery. And these," he added, ripping open another box, "are reinforced treads from a biker club in Nevada. They said, 'Let the big dog roll like a king.'" He grinned, his youthful enthusiasm filling the dusty room with life. Atlas looked up at Kyle's voice, ears flicking. The giant shepherd's expression was calmer now, gentler. His trust radiated through the slow wag of his tail. Weak, but filled with meaning. Atlas's gaze would drift from Kyle to Owen constantly, as though he understood that the two humans had become his new unit, his pack. A new voice chimed in, soft, mature, warm. "You boys need anything?" "Mara." Henderson stepped through the open garage door carrying a tray of lemonade. Mara was the garage owner's wife, a woman in her early 50s with short auburn hair and kind hazel eyes framed by faint crow's feet. She had been one of the earliest donors after Kyle's video went viral. Her personality was as comforting as the smell of cookies that always seemed to follow her, and she took an immediate liking to Atlas. "He looks stronger today," she added, setting the tray down gently. "He is," Owen said, not looking up from his welding. "Just needs the right equipment." His tone held a mixture of iron and warmth, a soldier's certainty mingled with a caretaker's hope. After hours of shaping aluminum, adjusting tension rods, and attaching reinforced wheel shafts, Owen finally shut off the welder. The garage fell quiet. Kyle stepped closer, eyes wide with anticipation. Mara clasped her hands over her chest. Atlas lifted his head, watching them all with bright curiosity. Owen wiped grease from his hands and crouched beside Atlas. "All right, big fella," he murmured. "Time to see what your new wings feel like." His deep voice softened the way a storm softens before sunrise. Together, Owen and Kyle gently lifted Atlas and positioned his hind legs into the custom harness. The metal frame fit perfectly along his body, distributing weight evenly, hugging him securely. Kyle fastened the padded straps, checking each buckle with trembling hands. When the wheels finally touched the ground, Atlas froze, muscles stiff, eyes wide with uncertainty. "It's okay," Kyle whispered. "We've got you." Owen moved in front of Atlas and knelt, meeting the dog's gaze directly. "You listen to me," he said quietly, voice filled with unwavering command but also deep affection. "You're not broken, not anymore. You're rebuilding. And now—" He placed one large hand gently on Atlas's chest. "Now you move forward." Atlas blinked slowly. His ears twitched. Owen stood, stepped back, and gave the first command Atlas had heard since lying helpless in the snow. "Forward." Atlas hesitated. His front paws shifted, claws scraping gently against the concrete. The wheels creaked. "Forward," Owen repeated. Atlas inhaled, trembling, then pushed. The chair rolled. Just an inch at first, then another. Then momentum caught. Atlas surged forward like an arrow released from a bow. Kyle whooped so loudly he nearly startled Atlas into a sprint. Mara clapped her hands over her mouth, tears welling. "Owen!" Owen stood tall, shoulders straightening, chest lifting as pride warmed through him like fire. Atlas rolled across the garage, fast, smooth, steady. The wheels hummed against the floor. The sun spilled across his fur as he sped through the open doorway and into the bright spring air. His eyes gleamed, not just with excitement but with something ancient. Joy, purpose, life. Atlas barked, a strong, thunderous sound that echoed off the buildings. He was no longer crawling through pain, no longer dragging his broken body. He was running again, running toward a future he had fought for. And Owen, watching him tear across the open lot, whispered, "Attaboy." Dawn broke gently over dusty hills, spreading a soft gold sheen across the empty road that stretched beyond the town like a promise waiting to be claimed. 2 months earlier, Owen Carter would have ignored such a sunrise. His world had been muted then, silent, gray, stripped of purpose. But now, as he stood beside Kyle Rivers loading the last supplies into the back of the dust-worn pickup, the morning light felt different. Warmer, fuller, like something inside him had begun to thaw. Owen, with his tall, rugged frame, broad shoulders, and long dark hair swept behind his ears, looked less like a ghost of a soldier and more like a man re-entering the world, still rough around the edges, still scarred, but breathing again. Atlas sat beside him, strapped securely into his new camo-patterned wheelchair. The massive German Shepherd looked magnificent, his thick tan and black coat catching the morning glow, his deep brown eyes alive with a newfound fire. The wheels beneath him gleamed, polished from their first triumphant test run. He barked once, sharp, eager, a soldier asking for marching orders. Kyle, buzzing with restless excitement, jumped down from the truck bed and stretched. His blonde curls were sun-touched, his lean frame draped in a patched denim jacket crowded with pins from every state he'd visited. He looked like a wandering storyteller ready to take on the world, which was exactly what he intended to do. "Well," Kyle said, grinning, "squad's assembled." Owen crossed his arms, though the faint twitch at the corner of his mouth betrayed amusement. "Cross America, squad," Kyle added brightly. "Sounds ridiculous," Owen muttered, "but fitting." With that, Owen lifted Atlas into the truck's customized ramp, securing him into the padded harness Kyle had installed for long drives. The Shepherd let out a satisfied huff and settled in. The journey began. They drove first into the blazing openness of Nevada, where the desert stretched endlessly beneath a sky so blue it seemed unreal. The heat shimmered above the asphalt, yet Atlas loved it, his wheels rolling effortlessly across the sandy ground, leaving twin tracks behind him. Owen walked beside him with a steady gait, his boots sinking into warm dust, while Kyle filmed every step, narrating with breathless wonder. At a small gas station outside Tonopah, they met Maria Delgado, an elderly woman with silver hair braided neatly behind her shoulder and soft, caramel-colored eyes. She ran the tiny corner store alone. When she saw Atlas wheeling confidently toward her, she gasped, covering her heart with wrinkled hands. Maria had lost her own dog, her only companion, 2 years earlier and had never fully recovered. Atlas pressed his forehead gently against her palm, and something in her cracked open. Tears rolled freely. "He's telling you you're not alone," Kyle whispered behind the camera. Her smile trembled. I think he is." From Nevada, they traveled north into the emerald vastness of Washington. The rain arrived first, cold, steady, drenching the world in silver. Owen walked through it without flinching, rain droplets clinging to his beard, darkening his long hair. He always looked at home in the elements. Atlas rolled proudly through puddles, kicking up arcs of water. Kyle filmed him splashing like a puppy, laughing so hard his voice cracked. In the shadow of towering pines, they crossed paths with Richard Yates, a middle-aged forest ranger with a sun-spotted complexion and a tired but steady gaze. Richard had once served in the army, and, like Owen, carried ghosts he didn't speak of. When he learned Atlas had survived spinal trauma, he knelt beside the dog, stroking his thick fur, his voice heavy. "Wish I'd had this kind of strength back then," he murmured. Owen placed a firm hand on Richard's shoulder, squeezing once. "You still do." From the forests, the trio drifted south toward the California coast. The ocean greeted them with roaring waves, salt-bitten air, and endless horizons. Atlas raced along the beach, wheels carving clean lines through wet sand. Kyle jogged behind him, camera bouncing wildly as he filmed. Owen watched them from a distance, boots planted firmly, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. The wind ruffled his dark hair, and for a moment he let himself simply feel the world. The crashing surf, the dog's joy, the boy's laughter. Something inside him lifted. Everywhere they went, Atlas's story reached someone who needed it. A teenager battling depression, a veteran struggling with PTSD, a widow drowning in loneliness. And each time, the giant shepherd, on his steel wings, offered hope without hesitation. Kyle's channel exploded. Millions followed their route across America, sending messages, donations, and stories of their own healing. Owen hated the attention but loved the impact. "If it helps someone stand back up," he grumbled one night by the campfire, "then point that camera wherever you want." Kyle laughed and kept filming. Their journey eventually led them to a sight beyond words, the Grand Canyon at sunset. They stood atop a high red cliff where the world fell away into a cathedral of stone and silence. The sky burned in hues of gold and crimson. Atlas rolled forward until he reached the edge, his strong shoulders lifting him tall, ears perked, eyes bright with ownership of the moment. Owen came to stand beside Kyle. For a rare moment, the old soldier looked young, hopeful. Kyle lifted the camera slowly. Owen rested a heavy, warm hand on the young man's shoulder. "You did good," Owen murmured. "No," Kyle whispered. "We did this, all of us." The wind swept across the canyon and lifted Atlas's fur like a banner. Behind them, the sun dipped lower, bathing them in molten light. In that sacred stillness, it became clear. They weren't just saving Atlas. They were saving each other. And somewhere on Kyle's screen, before he uploaded the final video of their journey, the words appeared. "Sometimes you save a life, only to realize the one being saved is you." In the end, Atlas's journey became more than a rescue story. It became a reminder that miracles still walk beside us, often in the shape of broken things learning to rise again. Some say it was luck, others call it fate. But I believe it was one of those quiet works of God, the kind that appears when compassion meets courage. And just like Atlas, many of us carry invisible wounds through the noise of daily life, waiting for a hand to lift us, or a sign that hope still breathes. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that they are not forgotten. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and let this message fly further than we ever could alone. May God bless every viewer who watches this, and may His grace guide you gently through whatever battles you face.